Good afternoon. What I see as the strongest argument in the two UW opinion pieces with regard to the colon, I think the strongest point was that Jewish studies programs that have grown out of a large group of a Jewish community owe it to the community to behave in a way congruent with the values of the community. So I think that was the most important piece with regard to that article. I think the piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education is that soft power versus hard power, I think is very complex. In other words, expressing dismay about what's going on the campus from donors is one thing, but donors having hard power to control what the university is doing or not doing, or what professors are not doing or are doing, is grossly inappropriate, in my opinion. Strings attached is not okay, especially in light of academic freedom. With regard to what was unconvincing, the Colin article that discussed that letter written by the Jewish professors referring to their support for Gaza should have made it clear that they supported Gazan and West Bank citizens, not their corrupt government, nor Hamas or any of the other militant far-right authoritarian political parties or their military branches. I think those distinctions would have made this a lot less controversial. And I think it's important to remember that both Freedom House, which scores countries on political and civil rights, and the European Council on Foreign Relations refer to the clear evidence that both Gaza and the West Bank are corrupt, non-democratic governments. And that's important to remember. So when I hear people say, well, they elected those people. Well, no, they haven't. Elections are corrupt and fraudulent. And even the last few, as I had noted in looking at these two resources, were canceled. So those are authoritarian governments. So the government does not represent the people. And so it's inappropriate to confuse citizens in these places with the government or the paramilitary terrorist branches of Hamas and other far-right organizations. So I had to say that. This letter should have also indicated their support for the Jewish people, Israel as a democratic government, and their support for a two-state solution. So I think that's really important. And the other thing that's important is I feel free to criticize any government on the globe. I criticize ours quite frequently, i.e. here in the United States, since Trump was elected and before Trump was elected. We have never really been a 100% democracy. We're more like a plutocracy, quite frankly. And there's a wonderful video on topdocumentaryfilms.com that talks about the history of the American plutocracy. And it's important to note, too, that our score on Freedom House is about an 81 for political and civil liberties combined, and Israel's is about a 72. What I also think is important is to understand the relationship between academic freedom and academic scholarship and Jewish communal life, I would argue. I think that's the one thing that's omitted from all these pieces. Academic freedom, excuse me, is a concept that must be supported and has its roots in the 19th century. This is according to Reichman in 2025. There were bans by Christian religious authorities in the 12th century trying to control what academics was doing. And this was before Jews had that kind of power, of course. So in the 19th century, the Prussian government asked Wilhelm von Humboldt to reform the educational system He founded the University of Berlin, wrote his own letter to the Prussian king outlining this idea that constraints on higher education must be limited, if not absent, and that universities must be free of outside government and economic constraints so it can constructively and independently pursue both research and instruction. And I know I'm going over a little bit, but I think that that's really important here to keep in mind. I do think we are beholden as a Jewish institution to the Jewish community, and that's pretty apparent in the Gratz history. Thank you to Professor Goldman for making that clear. In terms of my own convictions, who is my work for? Well, it is for me, but I also believe it is for the public. You know, every time I wrote and published as a sociologist and criminologist, I wanted criminology and sociology to become publicly consumed, i.e., I hated it that it was only read by other academics. So I think it is intended, in my mind, research to inform public policy and public practices and public education. And I think insulting community members and making statements that can be easily misconstrued or defined as anti-Semitic or Jew hatred, even by Jews. I mean, just like queer people have internalized homophobia, Jews can have internalized Judophobia. I think it's important, very important. And I love Judaism. My father was Jewish. I converted about 15, 20 years ago. I always get the dates confused, so I have to look back at that. But I owe it to myself, to my idea of divinity, and I think it is perfectly okay. I love the piece that talked about a warm understanding between Jewish thought spiritually, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Tanakh, the Torah, as integrated with academic thought. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with Judaism, because study and new interpretations and new knowledge brings me closer to the divine. So that's my piece, and I think those relationships should be cemented or integrated, and warm conversations and open listening with compassion is extremely important. I think I have answered all of those questions. Thank you so much.